Everyone always told me I had it all. Leah, your life is perfect, they'd say, with a smile or a hint of envy. They saw the beautiful home, the well-dressed husband, the happy dinners, the vacations. From the outside, I seemed to have a dream life, the kind people post about online and pretend they're living. But here's the truth. They had no idea. They didn't see the quiet fear, the constant anxiety, or the tiny rules that controlled every part of my life. They didn't see how a simple purchase could turn into an argument, how a smile from my husband could hide a judgment or a sneer. People only see the surface, and the surface was perfect. My name is Leah, and I want to tell you what it's really like to live behind that perfect surface, the story no one else sees. When I first married David, I thought I had found the man of my dreams, charming, successful, attentive, everything I ever wanted. But it didn't take long for the first cracks to appear. Little comments here, little digs there. Do you really need that? Or you're spending too much again. At first, I laughed them off. I thought maybe I was just being sensitive, overthinking things, but the jokes weren't jokes. The digs weren't harmless. And then, one day, he crossed the line that changed everything. He looked at me with that smirk he always wore when he thought he was clever and said, "You'll have to beg me even for tampon money. Forget about your credit cards." I froze. I couldn't speak. My chest tightened and my stomach sank. Me begging for something so basic, something normal, something human. The humiliation was suffocating. And in that moment I realized I was controlled. Every little choice I made, every dollar I spent, was being monitored, judged, and restricted. For days I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying those words over and over. How did I, Leah, someone who had always been independent and strong, end up here, trapped in a marriage where my freedom, my dignity, even my smallest needs were denied? I started noticing all the patterns I had ignored, the sly rules, the constant monitoring, the small punishments hidden as jokes. Fear was there, yes, but so was a spark of anger, a quiet determination that refused to be extinguished. I knew that if I didn't fight back, I would be swallowed whole by this silent prison. Then, one afternoon, I noticed it, a careless bank statement left on the counter, showing exactly how little control I had over my own money. That statement wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a challenge, and for the first time in months, I felt hope. I was ready to take the first step, even if I had no idea how dangerous it might be. I had no idea that this tiny act of control would start a storm that would shake my entire life, and David had no clue what was coming. After that day, nothing felt the same. Every interaction with David was like walking on eggshells, and I started noticing things I had brushed off before. The little comments, the sideways glances, the sighs when I spent money on something he deemed unnecessary. They weren't just habits, they were tools. Tools to keep me under control, to remind me that I wasn't really in charge of my own life. I started paying attention to everything. The way he held the grocery receipts like evidence of my bad choices, the way he questioned every little decision I made. At first I felt trapped, suffocated, powerless. And then came the quiet, gnawing anger, the kind that creeps in when you realize you've been underestimated, dismissed, treated like your voice doesn't matter. I began small, almost imperceptibly. I checked my bank statements more carefully. I memorized patterns in his behavior, the times he would be distracted, the moments when he would forget to lock away certain things. Every tiny window became an opportunity. I knew I had to be careful. One wrong move, and he would notice. One wrong move, and he would tighten his grip even more. But I couldn't keep pretending. I couldn't keep smiling while my dignity was being chipped away piece by piece. I started keeping little notes for myself, ideas, reminders, plans. Nothing fancy, nothing too obvious, just small markers of my independence, proof that I could still think, plan, and act on my own. And the strangest thing happened. I started noticing moments of strength I hadn't realized I had, moments when I spoke up, even quietly, and he hesitated, moments when I made a small choice for myself, and it felt like reclaiming a piece of my soul. Each tiny victory, each small act of rebellion gave me more courage. Still, fear lingered. David was unpredictable. He had a way of turning small things into big punishments, of making me doubt myself. But the anger, the fire inside me, was stronger than the fear. I realized I couldn't rely on anyone else to save me, not friends, not family, not even circumstances. I had to save myself. It was during one of those quiet, tense evenings that I saw it again. A careless bank statement left out on the counter, another reminder of my lack of control. But this time, I didn't feel defeated. I felt challenged. That paper was more than numbers. It was a key to taking back my life if I was clever enough to use it. And deep down, I knew I was ready. I didn't know it yet, but that spark of rebellion would ignite a plan so daring, so risky, that David would never see it coming, and my life would never be the same. After weeks of walking on eggshells, I realized something crucial. I couldn't wait for anyone to hand me freedom. It wasn't going to happen. I had to take it myself, but I had to be careful. David's control was suffocating, but it was also predictable. And I decided I could use that predictability to my advantage. I started with small, quiet things. I opened a new email account in secret, one he didn't know about. Then I researched online ways to regain some control over my finances without him noticing. It felt almost criminal, like I was tiptoeing through a minefield, but every small action made me feel alive again. For the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't just about money. It was about taking back the part of me that had been silenced. I started keeping a hidden notebook with my thoughts, my plans, things I wanted to say but couldn't. Writing became my secret therapy, a way to reclaim my mind from the constant fear and manipulation. I began thinking in steps, like a chess player, anticipating his moves and planning mine. David, of course, remained blissfully unaware. He continued to mock me in subtle ways, not realizing that each taunt, each sneer, was fueling the fire inside me. "You really think you can handle your own money?" he'd ask, smirking, not knowing that I was already setting up the tools I needed to prove him wrong. I remember one particular evening vividly. He left the kitchen after a dinner filled with small jabs about my spending. I lingered behind, pretending to clean up, but in reality, I was examining the bills and bank statements, noting patterns, checking how much he assumed I could or couldn't access. That night, I realized something powerful. I didn't need him to give me permission to exist. I just had to be clever, patient, and strategic. It was exhausting balancing fear and secrecy with the burning need for freedom. But the tension also sharpened me. Every time I made a small choice for myself without him noticing, I felt a surge of empowerment. Even something as simple as ordering a personal item online to a friend's address felt like a tiny rebellion, a quiet victory against months of control and humiliation. Still, I had to remind myself constantly, one mistake, one slip, and he would notice. One mistake, and all my careful planning could unravel. But the fire inside me was stronger than my fear now. I knew I couldn't live like this forever. I had to act, and I had to act smart. I didn't know it yet, but my first secret steps toward independence were only the beginning. Soon, I would be forced to make a choice that could change everything, risking everything I had for the chance to finally be free. Every day felt like walking a tightrope. I had learned to move quietly, think carefully, and act in the shadows. My secret plans were growing, small step by small step, but the risk of being caught always loomed over me. I knew I couldn't be reckless. One slip, and David would tighten his control even further, maybe beyond repair. Still, I had to test the limits. I started making small decisions for myself, things he had always tried to control. I signed up for a few online workshops under my secret email, learning things I had always wanted to explore but never dared to because of his disapproval. I ordered books that inspired independence and even some small personal items that were delivered to a friend's house. Each action felt like breathing fresh air after months of suffocation. David, as usual, remained unaware, or so I thought, but I could sense subtle shifts in his behavior. A flicker of suspicion in his eyes when I returned from a walk, a slightly tighter grip on the bills he handed me, as if he were double-checking something. He was beginning to notice little things, but not enough to catch on completely, and I realized that was my advantage. I could push the boundaries slowly, carefully, while he remained blind to my true intentions. One evening, while he was distracted with work, I sat down with my hidden notebook and started planning more concrete steps. How could I regain access to my finances without him noticing? How could I assert my independence in ways small enough to avoid suspicion, yet big enough to remind myself that I wasn't powerless? Each plan felt like a puzzle, and I had become obsessed with solving it. But it wasn't just about money anymore, it was about reclaiming who I was. The Leah that existed before the control, before the humiliation, before the fear. I wanted to feel human again, to make choices for myself, to exist without asking permission for every small thing. And the fire inside me had grown too strong to ignore. That night, as I lay in bed pretending to sleep while David snored beside me, I realized something terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. I was no longer afraid of small acts of defiance. Every hidden email, every secret purchase, every step toward independence was proof that I could take back control of my life. But the deeper truth hit me harder. I wasn't just reclaiming my freedom in small pieces. I was preparing for a moment that would change everything. I didn't know it yet, but David was starting to sense that something had shifted, and soon he would be forced to face the Leah he had underestimated for far too long. The more I practiced my small acts of independence, the bolder I became. Every secret email, every hidden purchase, every quiet step I took toward control made me feel alive in a way I hadn't in months. I knew I had to be careful. One wrong move, one slip, and David would tighten his grip. But the fear was starting to feel different now. It was no longer paralyzing. It was fuel. That evening, after David left for a late meeting, I made my first bold move. I transferred a small amount of money from the account he controlled to a hidden account I had opened secretly weeks ago. My hands trembled as I typed in the numbers, but I didn't stop. For months, he had made me feel powerless, helpless, and small. And now, for the first time, I felt a surge of power. It was mine. All mine. I knew it was risky. If he discovered it, there would be hell to pay. But I had to know I could do it, that I could take something he had kept from me for so long and turn it into my own. And when the transfer was complete, I sat back and let out a long, quiet breath. For the first time in months, I smiled. Not a forced, polite smile, but a real one. A smile of victory, of courage, of quiet defiance. Of course, David remained unaware for now, but I started to notice tiny shifts in his behavior, subtle hints that he was beginning to suspect something. A raised eyebrow, a lingering glance when I entered the room. I knew I had to be even more careful, but I also realized that the tension was exhilarating. He had always underestimated me, always assumed I would stay in line, always assumed I would be silent, and he was about to be proven wrong. That night, lying in bed while he snored beside me, I felt a strange mix of fear and excitement. Fear because one mistake could unravel everything. Excitement because I finally had proof that I could act, even in the smallest way, without his knowledge or permission. I was no longer just surviving. I was starting to plan my escape from the invisible cage he had built around me. I also started documenting everything, his controlling habits, the small humiliations, the ways he made me doubt myself. It felt like creating an invisible shield for myself, a way to remind myself that I was not alone in my struggle and that one day the truth would come out. Every detail I recorded was a small weapon, a way to reclaim my story and my voice. By the end of the night, I realized something crucial. This wasn't just about money or small acts of rebellion anymore. It was about taking back my life piece by piece, proving to myself that I could survive and thrive even under his control. The first bold step had been terrifying, but it had also changed me. I felt stronger, sharper, and more determined than ever. Little did I know David was starting to sense the shift in me, and soon my bold moves would force him to confront the Leah he had thought he could control forever. I knew my small victories wouldn't last forever. David was sharp, more observant than I had initially realized, and one evening that sharpness became clear in a way I hadn't expected. It started with a question. "Leah, why did you order this?" His voice was calm, but the tension behind it was unmistakable. My stomach dropped. My first instinct was to panic, to freeze, to make excuses. But I had been preparing for this. I had to stay calm, to appear as if nothing had changed. I needed it, I said softly, trying to keep my voice steady. I didn't give him details. Details were dangerous. His eyes narrowed, and I could feel the judgment behind his gaze. You didn't ask me, he said, just a whisper, but it carried the weight of every controlling word he had ever said. I realized then that this was a test, one I had to pass without giving away what I had been planning for weeks. I stayed quiet for a moment, pretending to be innocent, letting him believe he still held the power. But inside, I was calculating, planning my next move. I couldn't let fear stop me now. That night, as we sat in silence after dinner, I could feel his eyes on me. He was probing, trying to sense if something had shifted, but I had learned to mask my true thoughts, to hide the rebellion simmering inside me. I smiled politely, nodded, and carried on, all while my mind raced through every step I had taken, every move I had made in secret. I knew that confrontation was only the beginning. David had begun to notice small changes. The way I handled money, the way I started standing up for myself in subtle ways, the quiet defiance in my voice. And though he hadn't caught me yet, the tension between us had shifted. I could feel it. The cage I had lived in for so long was starting to crack. That night, lying in bed, I thought about how far I had come. Each secret email, each hidden purchase, each tiny act of defiance had built my confidence. But I also realized that the real challenge was ahead. David would soon confront me directly, testing me in ways I hadn't faced before. I needed a plan, a careful, calculated plan that would keep me safe and slowly tip the balance of power back into my hands. For the first time, I felt the adrenaline of strategy mixed with fear. I had survived months of subtle humiliation and control, but now I was stepping into a new phase, the phase where I no longer just survived. I fought. Every small act, every secret step I took was leading me toward freedom. But freedom came with risk, and I knew the next move could change everything. I didn't know it then, but the next time David tried to assert control, I would have to make a choice that could either destroy me or finally give me the power I had been waiting for. By now, I knew I couldn't wait any longer. The small acts of defiance had given me courage, but courage alone wouldn't set me free. I had to take a real step, a bold, calculated step toward reclaiming my life, and I had spent weeks planning it. It started with a simple but crucial move, regaining control over my finances. I had been transferring small amounts of money secretly, but now it was time to secure a part of my future, something David couldn't touch, something only I knew about. My hands trembled as I completed the transfer, the numbers on the screen feeling like a key to my freedom. I was terrified he might notice, but the exhilaration was stronger than the fear. That night, as he lounged in the living room, I carried myself differently. I didn't speak much, but I felt lighter, stronger. Even in the quiet moments, I could feel the shift in the energy between us. David still hadn't realized the magnitude of my actions, but I could sense a subtle unease, a twitch of suspicion here, a questioning glance there. He was starting to notice something had changed, but he had no idea what. I also started preparing for the worst-case scenario. I documented everything, every controlling remark, every small humiliation, every moment that made me doubt myself. I wrote it down carefully in a hidden notebook. It wasn't just for me, it was evidence, a reminder that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't imagined his cruelty, and one day it could help me break free completely. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about how far I had come. Months ago, I would have cowered at a single word of criticism, but now I had learned to protect myself, to fight quietly, cleverly, and strategically. Each secret step I took was a declaration. I was no longer powerless, and I would no longer live in fear. But I also knew that taking this step meant the tension was rising. David would eventually notice, and when he did, the confrontation would be inevitable. I had to prepare, not just for him discovering what I had done, but for the emotional and psychological battles that would follow. I couldn't allow panic or fear to stop me now. I had come too far, and in that quiet, tense moment, I made a promise to myself. I would reclaim every part of my life that had been stolen from me, every small humiliation, every controlling word, every time I had been silenced. I would take them back, and I would do it on my terms. I didn't know it yet, but David was about to take notice of the first real changes in me, and the moment he did, everything would begin to unravel. It didn't happen all at once. The shift was subtle at first, almost imperceptible, but I could feel it, and I knew David could too. Something had changed in me, something quiet, something small, but it carried weight, and it was enough to make him uneasy. He started watching me more closely, not with suspicion yet, but with curiosity. A raised eyebrow when I lingered a little longer on my phone, pause when I made decisions without consulting him. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the realization slowly dawning that the Leah he had assumed he controlled so easily was no longer the same woman. I had to be careful. Every step I took, every small act of independence had to be calculated. One slip, one sign that I was stepping out of line, and he could crush the fragile control I had built for myself. But I also knew that I couldn't stop now. Every little act of rebellion, every quiet move toward freedom was proof to myself that I was no longer powerless. One evening, he caught me glancing at something online, just a personal research article, nothing that seemed significant, and his voice cut through the room, sharp and curious. "What are you looking at?" he asked, a tone of suspicion threading his words. My heart pounded, but I didn't flinch. I smiled faintly, keeping my tone calm. "Just some things I'm interested in," I said lightly. I didn't elaborate, and he let it go, but I knew that tiny interaction had tested me, and I had passed. That night, lying in bed, I reflected on how far I had come. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was fighting back, slowly, carefully, in ways he couldn't yet understand. Every hidden email, every secret transaction, every quiet decision I had made was building momentum, creating a quiet storm that David had no idea was coming. And yet, the danger was real. David wasn't oblivious. He was sharp, and he was starting to notice the cracks. The glances, the pauses, the subtle unease in his tone, they were all signs that the game had changed. And the higher the tension, the more cautious I had to be. One wrong move, and he would tighten his control in ways I couldn't predict. But I wasn't afraid anymore, not like I used to be. The fear had been replaced by determination, by a growing sense of power. I knew that every calculated move I made, every quiet act of defiance, was preparing me for the bigger steps ahead. I had tasted the first victories, and I wasn't going to stop until I had reclaimed everything that had been taken from me. I didn't know it yet, but David was on the verge of discovering just how much I had changed, and the next confrontation would force both of us to face the consequences of the power shift that was quietly taking place. I could feel it in the air. The tension between us had shifted. David was no longer completely at ease around me. He wasn't yet confronting me directly, but there was a subtle change in his behavior that I couldn't ignore. The slight hesitation before he spoke, the careful way he observed my every move, the way he lingered near the kitchen when I was cooking, it all told me he was noticing something he didn't like. I reminded myself to stay calm. Patience had become my greatest weapon. Every step I took had to be measured, every act of independence carefully calculated. But I couldn't stop now. Every time I made a small choice without his knowledge, it reminded me that I still had power, that I could still fight. That evening, he asked me about my day, his tone unusually sharp. "What were you doing this afternoon?" he asked, and there was an edge in his voice that made my pulse quicken. I looked at him calmly, masking the storm inside me. "Just some reading," I said lightly, keeping my voice soft but steady. I didn't give details. Details could be dangerous. I noticed the way he narrowed his eyes, lingering on me for a moment longer than usual. I could sense the suspicion building, but he still didn't have proof, and that's exactly how I wanted it. Every small step I had taken, every secret email, every hidden transaction, every quiet act of defiance had been building toward something bigger, something he could not control or predict. That night, I wrote in my hidden notebook, documenting everything, every small dig, every controlling comment, every moment that had made me feel powerless. It wasn't just a record, it was a blueprint, a reminder that I was reclaiming my voice, my life, piece by piece. And the more I wrote, the more I felt a strange sense of empowerment. The thing about control is that it works only as long as the person being controlled believes they have no choice. And I had made a choice. I was no longer playing the role of the submissive wife who silently endured humiliation. I was plotting, planning, and quietly reclaiming every part of my life that had been stolen from me. David may have been noticing the shift, but he didn't yet know how far I had come. He had underestimated me, as he always did, and that was my advantage. I was patient, careful, and strategic. And soon he would be forced to confront the new Leah, a Leah he had never seen coming. I didn't know it yet, but the next time David tried to assert control, he would face a Leah who had been quietly preparing for this moment, and nothing would ever be the same again. It was a quiet evening, and David was in his usual routine, checking emails, scrolling on his phone, completely unaware of the storm brewing quietly under his roof. I had been waiting for the right moment, planning it for weeks. Tonight, I would take a step that was bigger than any of my previous acts, a move that would finally remind him that I was no longer powerless. I approached the kitchen counter with my hidden notebook and the printed statements I had secretly gathered. My hands shook slightly, not from fear, but from anticipation. Every detail had been documented, every controlling word, every dig, every subtle humiliation. And tonight, I wasn't just keeping it for myself. Tonight, it became a statement. David noticed me standing there and raised an eyebrow. "What are you doing?" he asked casually, but the curiosity in his tone betrayed him. I looked him straight in the eyes and smiled faintly. "Just organizing some things," I said calmly, placing the statements and notebook in a folder I could easily access later. I didn't reveal everything, not yet. David paused, lingering for a moment longer than usual, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face. For the first time, I could see him thinking, wondering if he had underestimated me. That tiny hesitation, that split-second doubt, it was exhilarating. After he left the room, I carefully closed the folder and placed it in a hidden drawer I had prepared weeks ago. This wasn't just about money or documents. It was about reclaiming control over my life piece by piece. And in that moment, I felt a surge of power I hadn't experienced in months. But I knew this was just the beginning. David had started to sense the shift in me, and his awareness would only grow. Each small act I had taken, each secret move, had been preparing me for a confrontation that I now felt ready to face. And I was ready, not just to defend myself, but to assert my independence in ways he could no longer ignore. That night, as I lay in bed pretending to sleep while David watched TV, I thought about how far I had come. From the humiliation of begging for basic necessities to secretly reclaiming parts of my life, I had grown stronger, sharper, and more determined. The fire inside me was no longer small. It had become a blaze, ready to consume every limit he had placed on me. I also realized that my bold move had consequences. David would eventually notice the changes, and the confrontation would be inevitable. But I wasn't afraid anymore. The fear had been replaced by strategy, by patience, and by an unwavering determination to take back what was mine. I didn't know it yet, but David was about to discover the first undeniable signs that Leah was no longer the woman he could control, and the moment he did, nothing would ever be the same again. The change didn't happen overnight, but by now I could feel the cracks forming in David's control. He wasn't confronting me directly yet, but there was tension in every glance, every word, every silence between us. The once casual control he exerted over my life was starting to falter, and I could feel it, like electricity in the air, dangerous and intoxicating at the same time. It started with small things, a longer pause when I answered his questions, a fleeting look of confusion when I made a decision without consulting him, a subtle hesitation when he tried to assert authority in the kitchen. Each tiny reaction was proof that he was noticing the shift, and it thrilled me. I had learned to be careful, to hide my victories behind polite smiles and soft words. But the more I acted, the stronger I felt. I could see it now. The fear I once carried had been replaced by a quiet confidence. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was taking control, even if it was still in small, careful steps. One evening, David tried to push the boundaries, as he always did. Leah, why didn't you ask me before doing this? He asked sharply, referring to one of the hidden transfers I had made weeks ago. I met his gaze, steady and unflinching, and said, I wanted to handle it myself. The shock on his face was unmistakable. He wasn't used to being told no or seeing me take initiative without his permission. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. That hesitation, that split second of doubt, felt like a victory I had been craving for months. That night, as I lay in bed pretending to sleep, I could feel the tension building. David was beginning to realize that the Leah he thought he controlled was changing, and I knew the moment would come when he would confront me fully, demanding answers, demanding obedience. But this time, I was ready. I had spent weeks preparing, not just emotionally, but strategically. Every secret account, every hidden plan, every careful act of rebellion had been calculated to give me the upper hand when the confrontation came. I wasn't just reclaiming small freedoms anymore. I was preparing for the moment when I would take back my life entirely. And yet, fear lingered. Not fear of him controlling me, but fear of what could happen if he discovered the full extent of my actions. The stakes were higher now. One wrong move could destroy everything I had built, but alongside the fear was something stronger, the certainty that I could no longer live under his control. I had to push forward no matter the risk. I didn't know it yet, but David's next move would force me to make a decision that could either break me completely or finally set me free, and there would be no turning back after that. I knew it was coming. The tension had been building for weeks, and I could feel David's unease growing. Every glance, every subtle question, every pause in conversation hinted at the truth. He was starting to suspect that I was no longer the obedient, submissive Leah he thought he controlled. And tonight, the confrontation finally came. It started with a single question, sharp and deliberate. Leah, what have you been doing without telling me? His voice carried authority, but beneath it I could hear confusion, fear, and, dare I say it, uncertainty. I met his gaze calmly, letting him feel the weight of my composure. For so long I had trembled at his words. Now I felt a strange strength, as if a part of me he had never known had awakened. I've been living my life, I said softly but firmly, making my own choices for myself. Something I should have been able to do all along. He blinked, momentarily stunned. The power he had relied on for months, years, was slipping from his grasp, and I could see the realization dawning in his eyes. He tried to regain control, his tone rising slightly. You can't just... I can, I interrupted, my voice steady, unflinching. And I will. I've taken back what's mine, my dignity, my independence, my voice, and I'm not going to apologize for it. For a moment, the room was silent. He looked at me, disbelief etched across his face, trying to find the words to regain authority, but nothing worked. I could see it, the fear, the uncertainty, the recognition that he could no longer control me as he once had. That night, as I watched him retreat into his usual self-assured facade, I realized something extraordinary. The Leah who had cowered, who had begged for basic necessities, who had lived in quiet humiliation, she no longer existed. I had reclaimed my power piece by piece, and the confrontation only proved that I was ready to live life on my terms. And yet, the fight wasn't over. I knew David would push back, testing me, probing for weaknesses, trying to reassert control. But for the first time, I felt prepared. I had built my defenses carefully, planned my moves strategically, and strengthened my resolve. I was no longer a victim. I was a strategist, a fighter, a woman reclaiming her life step by step. I didn't know it yet, but the confrontation had only just begun, and the next move would decide whether I truly regained control or if the fight would spiral into something far more dangerous. After the confrontation, everything changed. The quiet tension that had existed for weeks shifted into a charged energy that I could feel in every room of our house. David was watching me differently now, hesitant, cautious, trying to anticipate my next move. And I, for the first time in months, felt fully awake, alive, powerful. I knew I had to push further. Small victories were no longer enough. I had tasted freedom, even in tiny doses, and I was determined to claim it fully. I started making choices openly, without hiding behind excuses or secret moves. I handled my finances with confidence, spoke my mind without fear, and even started reconnecting with friends I had drifted from under his influence. Each act was a declaration. I was no longer bound by his control. The look on David's face when I paid for something without consulting him was priceless. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was there. Shock, disbelief, and, slowly, frustration. For years he had relied on the quiet obedience that kept me in check. But now that obedience was gone, and he could feel it. I also started taking steps to protect myself in ways he couldn't anticipate. I organized documents, backed up accounts, and made secret plans for the life I was building. One where I didn't have to live in fear, humiliation, or dependency. Every precaution I took was a shield, a reminder that I was no longer powerless. One evening, he tried to assert control again, his tone sharp and commanding. Leah, this is not how things work, he barked. But this time, I didn't flinch. I looked him straight in the eyes, my voice steady and unwavering. No, David, this is how it works. I make my choices, I live my life, and I will no longer be silenced or controlled. For a moment he hesitated, unsure of how to respond, and in that hesitation I felt something shift within myself. The fear that had dominated me for months, years, was gone. Tree, replaced by clarity, determination, and strength. I was no longer his victim. I was Leah, strong, capable, independent. That night, as I lay in bed reflecting on everything that had happened, I realized how far I had come. From the humiliation of begging for the smallest things, to taking bold, strategic steps toward independence, to finally standing up and asserting my power, I had transformed. The Leah who had cowered in silence no longer existed. I didn't know it yet, but the final challenge was coming, one that would test everything I had fought for, forcing me to decide if I could finally break free or if the chains would tighten one last time. It all came to a head one evening when David confronted me directly. The subtle tension, the hesitant glances, the small challenges, it all led to this moment. I could see the mix of anger, disbelief, and frustration on his face. For years he had believed he controlled me completely. For years I had let fear dictate my actions, but not anymore. You think you can just decide everything for yourself? He demanded, voice rising. I stood my ground, heart pounding but calm, voice steady. Yes, David, I've been silent for too long. I followed rules I didn't agree with, begged for things that were mine by right, and tolerated control that was never fair. Not anymore. This is my life, and I will live it on my terms. His eyes widened in disbelief, the realization slowly sinking in that the Leah he thought he could dominate was gone. I wasn't pleading. I wasn't quiet. I was strong, clear, and unwavering. For the first time, he had no answer, no control, no power over my choices. I took a deep breath and thought of all the steps I had taken, the hidden accounts, the careful planning, the secret moves that had built my independence piece by piece. Every calculated risk, every small victory had led to this moment. And now I had to take the final step, not out of fear, but out of self-respect and determination. I am leaving, I said firmly. I'm not just taking control of my finances, my decisions, or my daily life. I'm reclaiming myself, and I will not allow anyone to control me like that again. The silence that followed was almost deafening. I could see the shock ripple across his face, the anger and frustration fighting with disbelief. But I wasn't afraid. I felt clarity, empowerment, and freedom coursing through me. Every moment of humiliation, every insult, every small act of control had brought me to this point, and now I was choosing myself. I walked out of that room with my head held high, my heart steady. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of liberation so deep it made my chest ache. I wasn't just walking away from control. I was walking toward my life, my independence, and my power. That night, as I lay in bed alone for the first time, I reflected on the journey from being trapped and humiliated to secretly planning, reclaiming small freedoms, and finally confronting him. I had grown stronger, wiser, and more resilient. I had discovered the true depth of my courage and the strength that had always existed inside me. I didn't know what the future held, but one thing was certain. I was no longer living in fear, silence, or control. I was Leah, free, powerful, and unstoppable, and nothing would ever take that from me again. It's quiet now, the kind of quiet that feels like freedom, not fear. I still wake up some mornings and feel a faint trace of the chains I carried for so long. But then I remind myself, those chains are gone. Every step I took, every secret act, every bold confrontation, it all led me here, to this moment, to me, fully alive, fully in control, and fully free. Leaving David was more than just walking out of a controlling marriage. It was reclaiming myself. My voice, my choices, my power, all of it was mine again. The months of planning, the courage to take small steps when it seemed impossible, and the nerve to finally stand up for myself. It wasn't easy, but I did it. I survived. I fought, and I won. I started rebuilding my life piece by piece. I manage my finances, make my own decisions, and surround myself with people who respect me and lift me up. Every little victory, every choice I make freely, is a reminder that I am no longer trapped. I don't feel the need to justify my actions to anyone anymore, least of all someone who tried to diminish me. And yet, it's not just about independence. It's about rediscovering who I am. Leah is no longer the woman who begged for basic necessities or silenced herself to survive. Leah is someone who has learned the depth of her strength, who has faced fear head on, and who has claimed her life on her terms. The Leah I once thought I had lost has returned, stronger and wiser than ever. I've also learned something deeper. Freedom isn't just the absence of control. It's the presence of self-respect, confidence, and courage. Every small step I took, every risk I made, was about more than money or independence. It was about reclaiming my soul, my dignity, and my right to live fully. Sometimes I look back at the months I spent under his control, and I shudder at the fear and humiliation I endured. But I also smile because that journey taught me who I really am. It taught me that even when people try to diminish you, even when the world seems stacked against you, you have a choice, you have power, and you can take it one bold step at a time. Tonight I close my hidden notebook for the last time, not as a record of fear or control, but as a testament to my journey. Every word I wrote, every plan I made, every small rebellion is a reminder that I fought for myself and won. I am Leah. I am free. I am unstoppable. And nothing, not fear, not humiliation, not anyone else, will ever take that from me again. Sometimes the strongest battles are the ones fought in silence, in secret, and in the heart. But when you stand up, take control, and reclaim your life, the victory is yours, and it is unstoppable. Did you like the story? Which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. If you enjoyed the story, you can support me by sending a super thanks so I can keep creating more stories like this. Thank you so much for your sweet support. There's a lot more waiting for you on my channel, Tales by Aunt Emery. Don't forget to subscribe.